I made a spare worksheet so that I could discuss a couple of things that we need to know before we do the next part of the example project. And so if you would like to create this worksheet, feel free to pause the video and just open a new worksheet and just build it. And by the way, the what you see here, I just randomly made some names and then made 2 columns of numbers, N1 and N2. So go ahead and pause it, build this workbook, and then when you're done, you can restart the video and we'll move on from there. So welcome back. I assume that half of you did not build this and you're just going to watch, and that's okay too. But what I would like to do in this section is I'd like to create the ability for me to enter a name over here on the left side. So this is like my entry area, and I'm going to go ahead and format this as like an entry number. So here I can go cell styles, and then we have this input style. So I'll just do that, and I want to be able to put a name in here like Mary, and when I enter this name, I would like formulas in cell C6 and C7 to look up Mary in the list and return the values for N1 and N2. So if I was doing this by hand, I'd say, okay, so you want to know for Mary. Let's look down the list till we find Mary. Oh, there she is. And I want 36 for N1. So 36 would show up here. And then for N2, I would want 86. And so that's what I'm hoping will happen. Now we have a special function that will do that for us, so that when we enter a name, it will look down through a list, it'll look for an exact match, and when it finds that match, then it will return a column from the same table. The function is our VLOOKUP, which stands for vertical lookup, and the parameters that it needs are, it needs a value to look up. In this case, our value would be Mary. It needs a lookup table, so a table to look in. It needs to know if it's looking, and it finds it, what column to return. So I'm just going to say column to give back. And then it also needs to know if it's an exact or an approximate match. And in this case, we want to say exact match. So let's go ahead and build a VLOOKUP in C6, and then hopefully this will make sense as you see what it's doing. So I'm going to type in equal to VLOOKUP, and then a parenthesis, and now it says what value are you looking up? And in this case, the value is the word Mary, which is in C5. So I'll go ahead and put C5 here. And then what is my table array, or my table that I'm looking it up in? Now, in this case, I don't want just the name. I want the whole table of value, or the whole table of values. So here I chose E5 through G11 as my whole table of values. And then I'm going to do a comma, and now it says, what column index do you want when we're done? And we don't count this as EFG. What it wants to know is, based on just the table we gave it, E5 through G11, let's count the columns starting with name as column 1. So N1 would be column 2, and N2 would be column 3. So if I want N1, which is what I want, that would be the second column in this range, or column 2. And then the last thing I want is an exact match. And you can see it gives you a little help here, but true is an approximate match and false is an exact match. So we want false. And then I can hit my parenthesis. And so when we have Mary in the name, N1 is going to be 36. And if we trace down through the list, N1 for Mary is 36. Let's change this to Lisa. And when we change it to Lisa, N1 changes to 51. Perfect. That's what we want. Now, a little hint when you're doing your VLOOKUP, if you don't know what to do with the column index number and the whether it's a exact match or an approximate match, the rule of thumb that I would use is always put 2 and false which almost rhymes with true and false. So, so it's kind of easy to remember. But those last two, I always put true and false if I'm not sure. And I'll show you why in just a second. Remembering that we're looking at, this is the range that it's looking at, so this is our table. Column 1 is what we're looking up, so we would never want the answer back of what we looked up. And so you would never put a 1 here, because that's the column that it's taking the name, the C5, and looking through to see if I find it. So 2 would be the first column it could return, and it's 80% of the time I use an exact match. So 2 and false just kind of makes sense. Let's do our N2. So equal to VLOOKUP. And again, I want C5, which is the name. And I want the same table array, which is E5 through G11. And now, because I'm not sure, I'll just do 2 and false, and then I'll close with my parenthesis. Now when I hit enter, notice it gives me the same number, 51. And when I look at that, I go, oh no, I'm off by 1 column. So now it's pretty easy for me to go back in there and just change that 2 to a 3 because I want the next column over. And now it's working. So if you're not sure, just do 2 and then count how many columns off you are and change your column number and it'll work. Let's test this. So let's put Sam in here and it's working, 2753. Now let's put Rick in here. And oh no, it broke. Why did it break? These NAs mean that there is no Rick in the list, so it couldn't find it and return a valid value. And there are a couple of ways of going after this, but what I'd like to show you is a way to set this up so that you can pick from a pull-down list. To do that, I'm going to go into C5, so I'm on C5 right now. And then I'm going to go to the Data tab, and then I'm going to choose Data Validation selection, and it's in the Data Tools, and it looks like 2 little entry fields from a web form, and one has a green check by it, and one has a little circle with a line through it. So I'm going to choose Data Validation, and then here I'm going to say where it says Allow, I'm going to say I want List. So what this is saying is only allow values that are in your list. And then for the source, I want to give it my list, so equal to, and then I'm going to give it the range of the names that are in my list, and I'll say OK. And now, when I pull this down, it gives me a list of values that are in this list over here, and I have to choose one of those items. We can take it a little further if you want. So I'm back on C5, which is my entry cell. If I click the data validation box, notice that I have tabs. So here's an input message and an error alert. I'm going to choose error alert, and then I can give a message. So here's my title. I'll say invalid name, and in the message I'll say please choose a name from the list. And I'll say OK. So now I can go in here and I have my list, but if I just decide to type because I don't want to choose from the list, Benjamin, it's going to say please choose a name from the list. So I'll say OK, retry, and then I'll hit my down, whoops, cancel. Let's hit the down arrow, and now I can pick somebody from the list. There's Sally. And notice that my lookup is working perfectly. And at this point, it prevents me from getting weird errors here because the VLOOKUP is forced to stick to items on the list. Now, I could still get away with something. I think if I hit delete, it's still going to freak out. There's a way to solve that as well. There's a special function called if error. It looks like this, if error, and then your parenthesis, and then you have a formula that may include functions, and a comma, and then a value to show if there was an error. So in this case, what I want to do is I'm going to go back into C6, and I'm going to go into my function, so double click, and between equal and VLOOKUP, I'm going to type if error, and hit my parenthesis. So basically I'm wrapping that first function with this outer if error function. I'm going to go to the very end of that and click, and then put a comma, and then instead of having that weird hashtag stuff, I'll just have it put in invalid name, and then close my quotes and close my parenthesis. So now if we get an invalid name, then for N1 it'll say invalid name as opposed to hashtag NA.